Normally, when we read an ancient scroll about an inner fire or, some 17th century manuscript detailing a golden flower looming inside a monk's head, we just
Yeah.
treat it as poetry.
Right. Yeah, we assume they just lack the modern vocabulary.
Exactly. We figure these ancient mystics didn't have words for psychology, so they used these elaborate metaphors to describe, like, feeling peaceful.
Right.
But what happens when you take a seasoned practitioner, put them into a modern MRI machine, and realize that that metaphor is actually, it's a literal instruction manual for weaponizing human cellular metabolism?
I mean, you realize we've been completely misreading history.
Yeah.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape right now that just upends everything we understand about human biology.
Right.
We have neuroimaging data, we have EEG readings, all suggesting that these ancient traditions were never actually talking about abstract moods.
Right. They weren't just vibing.
No, not at all. They were documenting highly specific cerebrospinal fluid dynamics,
Huh?
intense brainwave synchronization, and literal physical shifts in how cells produce energy.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. If you're joining us today, welcome. We are looking at a really fascinating stack of sources spanning modern neuroscience, clinical psychiatry, Eastern Taoist alchemy, and Western esoteric mysticism.
Just a huge stack.
It really is. So
Yeah.
prepare to have your perspective shifted because we are exploring whether spiritual enlightenment isn't a metaphor at all, but a literal, measurable biological process.
Yeah, and to really map this out, we have to start with the foundational mechanics of the brain itself. I mean, before we can decode what a 12th century mystic was doing, we need to understand a neurological plumbing system that modern science only discovered in 2012.
Which is just wild to think about. I mean, 2012, we've mapped the human genome, but we just recently figure out how the brain washes itself.
Yeah, it's called the lymphatic system.
Yeah,
Unlike the rest of your body, your brain doesn't have a traditional lymphatic drainage system.
right.
Instead, it relies on a paravascular network. So essentially, it's a series of channels running right alongside your blood vessels to flush out metabolic waste.
Stuff like amyloid beta.
Exactly. Amyloid beta is a protein heavily linked to neurodegenerative diseases. And the brain uses cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, to do this washing.
But the fluid doesn't just passively wash the surface of the brain like a gentle stream.
No, to actually clean the tissue, the CSF has to be forced deep into the brain parenchyma.
Meaning the deep functional tissue of the brain.
Right. And it gains access through these highly specific water channels called aquaporin 4. You can think of these channels as tiny gates located on the end feet of astrocytes.
And astrocytes are those star-shaped cells, right?
Yeah, they wrap around your blood vessels and act almost like bouncers at a club. They literally decide when the fluid is allowed to enter the brain tissue and when it isn't.
So if you're listening to this and wondering, well, why can't I just trigger this deep clean while I'm sitting in traffic or, stressing out at my desk? It comes down to the state of your nervous system.
Because this system absolutely does not run 24/7. It's entirely state-dependent. The lymphatic system is primarily active during deep sleep. During your waking hours, those astrocytic gates, the bouncers, they're mostly closed.
And the biological switch controlling that is norepinephrine, right?
Exactly. Norepinephrine is the neurotransmitter responsible for stress and arousal. When you finally fall into deep sleep, your norepinephrine levels just plummet.
And that drop causes something crazy to happen.
It does. The interstitial space, the actual physical gaps between your brain cells, expands by about 60%.
Which is huge. It's like a restaurant's deep cleaning crew. You cannot mop the floors and degrease the fryers while the restaurant is packed with customers and the kitchen staff is panicking during the dinner rush.
Right. The dinner rush is our waking state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Flooded with norepinephrine. The deep cleaning crew only comes out when the lights are off, the doors are locked, and the stress is gone.
And that physical expansion in the brain drops the resistance, allowing the cerebrospinal fluid to just rush in like a tidal wave. But here's where the ancient practices intersect with the biology. The system requires a low norepinephrine state with specific slow-wave brain activity.
Delta waves.
Delta waves, yes.
Yeah.
That's what opens the gates. So the clinical question became, is it possible to consciously hack this system and trigger that tidal wave while you are completely awake?
And we actually have the data on this now. David Vago's MRI study on expert meditators absolutely blew my mind when I read it.
Oh, it's incredible. Vago's team looked at practitioners who had logged over 2,100 hours of formal meditation. When they tracked the fluid dynamics in their brains using an MRI, they found a paradox.
Right, because the absolute volume of the CSF flowing through the cerebral aqueduct actually decreased during meditation.
Yeah, decreased, but the net flow efficiency massively increased.
So they weren't moving more water, they were just moving it perfectly.
Precisely. They created a highly synchronized rhythmicity in the fourth ventricle at exactly 0.05 to 0.08 hertz.
And that's significant because
Because that specific rhythmic pulse is virtually identical to the fluid dynamics we see during the deepest, most restorative stages of sleep.
okay, but what if you don't have 2100 hours to just sit on a cushion? The sources show there are external, non-pharmacological ways to trick the brain into opening these floodgates, right?
Yeah, immersive sound is one of the most effective methods documented.
Mm-hmm.
Techniques utilizing Tibetan singing bowls or, specific sustained acoustic chanting.
Okay, actual vibrational sound.
Right, it creates an auditory stimulation that diffuses across the scalp. And this creates a topographic brain profile that is basically indistinguishable from natural sleep. It artificially lowers that noradrenergic tone, dampens the norepinephrine, and induces those slow-wave delta frequencies.
So you are fully conscious, but your brain's plumbing system thinks you are in a deep sleep.
Exactly.
Well, if modern MRIs and EEGs are picking up this very real 0.05 hertz physical pulse of fluid moving through the spine and the brain, we have to look back at history.
We really do.
Because suddenly the ancient obsession with a sacred fluid or an inner elixir moving up the spine, it doesn't sound mythological at all anymore. It sounds like a literal anatomical observation.
It forces us to reevaluate entire esoteric traditions. Take esoteric Christianity, for example, and the work of George W. Carey in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
The sacred secretion.
Yes, his theory of the sacred secretion, or the Christ seed. He explicitly argued that a physiological fluid, which directly maps to cerebrospinal fluid, is produced in the midbrain, in an area called the claustrum.
And according to his reading of these ancient texts, this isn't just static fluid sitting there, it travels.
It travels all the way down the spinal cord to the solar plexus, down at the base of the spine. Carey claimed it incubates there for 2.5 days, a period he actually tied to the lunar cycle.
Okay.
And the texts argue that if a person preserves this vital energy and maintains physiological balance, the fluid ascends back up the spine.
Going back up.
Right. It eventually crosses the base of the skull, which is a physiological choke point he equates metaphorically to Golgotha.
Wow.
And then it floods the pineal and pituitary glands to awaken a higher state of consciousness.
So if Carey was actually describing human biology and not just Western philosophy, we should expect to see the exact same physical map in completely isolated cultures, right?
Right.
And we do. The Eastern parallels use entirely different language for the exact same biological plumbing.
Yeah, in Taoist internal alchemy, they frame this entirely around the three treasures: Qing, Qi, and Qian.
Walk us through those.
So Jing is the foundational essence. It resides low in the body and is explicitly linked to reproductive hormones, vital fluids, and genetic potential.
Like the raw material.
Exactly. Then Qi is the metabolic engine. It's the respiration and energy that moves things around. And Shen is the resulting spirit or consciousness that illuminates the mind.
Okay, I have to pause here and just play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Are we really saying that a 12th century monk or an ancient Taoist could actually feel a microscopic 0.05 hertz pulse of fluid in their spinal column? Or is it more likely they were just feeling deeply relaxed, their heart rate dropped, and they wrote a pretty poem about their energy rising?
I mean, it's a fair question, but the precision of their manuals suggests they were feeling the literal mechanics.
I think so.
Yeah. When Taoist texts describe the physical alchemical heating of Jing into Qi and then refining Qi into Shen, they provide rigid, very specific postural and breathing instructions to achieve it.
It's not just sit and relax.
No, it's an engineering manual. When esoteric texts describe the pituitary and pineal glands acting as the milk and honey of the promised land, they are describing the neuroendocrine system. They were mapping the physical sensation of that rhythmic fluid wave long before an MRI existed to validate it.
So if these texts were providing literal blueprints for the human nervous system, why has the modern West spent the last century treating them as purely psychological exercises? Like, how did we get it so incredibly wrong?
To answer that, we have to look at the translation of one specific, incredibly influential text, The Secret of the Golden Flower.
Ah, right.
This text is basically the Rosetta Stone for understanding how the West accidentally stripped the biology right out of Eastern alchemy.
It started as an internal alchemy manual, right?
Yeah.
Like a Needham text.
Yes. It was generated by spirit writing, or Fuji, in 1688 and 1692 by a community following an immortal named Zhu Xun.
Okay.
And it was an incredibly dense, highly practical guide to circulating physical energy through the body. But fast forward to 1929, and a German missionary named Richard Wilhelm translates it.
And he brings some baggage to it.
A lot of baggage.
Mm.
Wilhelm bizarrely speculates that the text was actually encrypted in Nestorian Christian teachings that had somehow infiltrated China.
Which is completely baseless.
Totally baseless. But the real damage happens when Wilhelm hands this translation over to his friend, Carl Jung.
Right, Carl Jung.
Jung writes the commentary for the book, and he views it entirely through the lens of his own psychoanalytic theories. He was desperate for cross-cultural validation for his ideas.
So he sees what he wants to see.
Exactly. He equates the Taoist golden flower to the Western alchemical concept of the philosopher's stone.
Wait, walk me through how Jung actually breaks the translation here. He looks at a physical instruction, like the circulation of the light, which involves, actual breathing and spinal focus. And what does he do with it?
He maps it to his own concept of active imagination. Jung was heavily influenced by Cartesian mind-body dualism.
That's the Western idea that the mind and body are separate, and the body is just kind of a vessel to be transcended, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So when the Taoists talked about qi, they were talking about literal metabolic energy, ATP production. But Jung translates qi as just a psychological metaphor.
Oh, wow.
The Taoists explicitly call the physical body a ding, a literal biological crucible required to forge physical and spiritual eternity.
So Jung looks at an operating manual for cellular metabolism and basically says, yes, this is just a metaphor for integrating your unconscious mind.
Yes.
He completely ignores the breathing mechanics, the posture, the nervous system.
He turned a physiological blueprint into a disembodied psychology textbook. And because Jung was so heavily influential, the entire Western world just followed his lead, assuming these practices had nothing to do with actual biology.
Man, that is frustrating. But okay, if Jung ignored the physical engine, what happens when a practitioner actually turns that engine on and pushes it to the absolute red line?
That's where things get wild.
Because our sources show this goes way beyond a peaceful, deep cleaning sleep state. We are talking about extreme weaponized bioenergetics.
Absolutely. To understand the extremes, we have to look at how human cells create energy in the first place. Normally, your body relies on glycolysis, which is the breakdown of glucose.
Right.
It's quick, but it only yields about 2 ATP molecules.
Right.
For sustained energy, you use standard aerobic respiration, which yields around 30 to 32 ATP.
Okay, so that's the baseline.
But advanced alchemical refinement deliberately forces the body to shift its primary fuel source.
It shifts away from glucose entirely.
It does. It shifts to the beta oxidation of fatty acids. The complete oxidation of a single fatty acid molecule, like palmitate, yields a staggering 106 to 129 ATP.
That is a massive jump. But how does sitting on a cushion trigger that? Like, how do you force your cells to switch from standard unleaded gas to pure rocket fuel?
Through intense, deliberate manipulation of oxygen and carbon dioxide, practitioners of Tummo, or psychic heat in Tibetan Buddhism, use a technique called vase breath, or kumbhaka.
Holding the breath, right?
Right. By holding the breath in specific pelvic locks, oxygen levels drop and carbon dioxide spikes. The mitochondria in the cells basically panic.
They think they're suffocating.
Yeah. To survive the hypoxic stress, they're forced to seek the densest possible energy source, which triggers that massive metabolic shift to burning fat.
And the physical byproduct of burning that rocket fuel is intense heat. I mean, we have documented scientific data of monks sitting in freezing sub-zero conditions wrapped in freezing wet sheets.
Yeah, the Harvard studies.
Right. And they raise their core body temperature to 38.3 degrees Celsius, essentially inducing a fever at will. And they raise the temperature of their fingers and toes by a massive 8 degrees Celsius.
But pumping that level of raw biological energy through the nervous system has really intense structural consequences for the brain. This is where Itzhak Bentov's physio-kundalini model becomes critical.
Bentov was a biomedical engineer, right? Not a mystic.
Correct. He hypothesized that when a practitioner enters these deeply rhythmic, high-energy states, the stabilization of the breath and the heart rate creates an acoustic standing wave in the aorta.
The main artery leaving the heart.
Exactly.
So the blood isn't just flowing, it's physically vibrating like a plucked guitar string.
Yes. That standing wave travels down the aorta, bounces off the bifurcation of the arteries in the pelvis, and travels back up the spine, physically vibrating the skull.
literally shaking the brain inside the skull.
Right. This micromotion sets up standing waves in the cerebrospinal fluid inside the brain's ventricles.
Okay, wait.
And this mechanical stimulation creates a cortical loop of electrical polarization. It's a literal electrical current sweeping through the sensory and motor cortex. The practitioner experiences this as an explosive energy, a kundalini awakening, tearing up from the base of the spine into the head.
Okay, I have to stop you. Because if I'm a standard clinical doctor and a patient comes in with their brain buzzing on beta oxidation rocket fuel, their core temp at a fever pitch, and electrical loops firing across their cortex, causing them to hear internal noises and see flashing lights,
Yeah.
I am diagnosing them with a psychotic break. I mean, how do we know this isn't just self-induced schizophrenia?
Clinical psychiatry has actually tested that exact assumption.
Right.
Yeah. Bruce Grayson conducted a landmark clinical study to determine if these kundalini awakenings were distinct from mental illness. He compared psychiatric patients, normal controls, and near-death experiencers, or NDEers, who frequently trigger these exact physiological states due to extreme trauma.
And he used a specific diagnostic tool to measure the symptoms, right?
He used the 19-item Physio-Kundalini Syndrome Index, and the data was definitive. The NDEers scored significantly higher on Physio-Kundalini symptoms, averaging 7.6 items.
What kind of symptoms?
They reported specific, localized sensations, like deep ecstatic tickles, moving pockets of extreme heat, and internal tones.
And what about those psychiatric patients? What did they score?
They averaged only 4.9, which was statistically indistinguishable from the normal, healthy control group.
Oh, wow.
The data proves that Kundalini phenomena driven by these acoustic standing waves and metabolic shifts are biologically and statistically distinct from psychosis. It is a highly organized, measurable physiological pathway. It's not a breakdown.
It's not a breakdown, it is a biological upgrade. Which brings us to the ultimate question for you listening. If you manage to flood your brain with cerebrospinal fluid, switch your metabolism to pure palmitate rocket fuel, and run a cortical loop of electricity across your brain, what is the goal? What does all this extreme biology actually produce?
Well, in the Taoist tradition, the culmination of this biological crucible is called the Shengtai, or the immortal fetus.
It sounds like a sci-fi concept. Autogestation.
It is the literal description of using your own internal sexual and vital energies, the refined Jing and Qi, to gestate a higher self over a period of 100 days. The texts claim this newly crystallized self possesses non-conflicting marks.
Meaning what exactly in practical terms?
Meaning the nervous system achieves a state of frictionless integration with universal physics. It doesn't resist the environment. It moves in perfect harmony with reality. And when we map that mythological description to the EEG readings of highly advanced meditators, the brainwave states are astonishing.
Because we aren't talking about alpha or beta waves here. Beta is just your standard stressed out waking state, and alpha is just baseline relaxation. We are way beyond that.
Advanced practitioners entering these transcendent states show a massive surge in gamma waves. Gamma operates between 30 and 100 hertz.
Which does what?
It is the frequency of unification. It binds all disparate sensory information in the brain into a single, hyperlucid perception. But the immortal fetus state, the absolute peak of the alchemical process, maps to two paradoxical extreme frequencies, epsilon and lambda.
How far apart are these two extremes?
Epsilon is incredibly slow. It operates under 0.5 hertz. It is slower than the deepest stages of sleep.
Wow.
It is the brainwave of suspended animation, what yogic traditions call samadhi. Lambda, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. It is ultra-fast, vibrating around 200 hertz. It is the frequency of ecstatic oneness and profound, lightning-fast cognitive processing.
Wait, that physically doesn't make sense. How can a human brain be in a state of suspended animation and high-speed processing at the exact same time?
This is where biology becomes almost poetic. Researchers examining these states found a circular link between the two extremes. If you look closely at the raw EEG data, the ultra-fast lambda wave actually rides inside the modulation of the ultra-slow epsilon wave.
No way.
And conversely, if you zoom out on the epsilon wave structure, it is actually carrying the lambda frequency.
Okay, think of it like the ocean. Epsilon is the massive, incredibly slow-moving swell deep underwater. It takes forever to rise and fall.
Yes.
And lambda is the rapid, chaotic foam of the whitecaps crashing at high speed on the surface. They look totally different. They move at completely different speeds, but it's the exact same body of water.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. It is a biological loop of absolute wholeness. The deepest, most profound unconscious stillness, the epsilon swell. literally carries the highest, most ecstatic conscious processing speed, which is the lambda whitecaps. Stillness and action become biologically identical.
That is staggering. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. For everyone listening, let's just trace this incredible biological journey one more time.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We started with the realization that your brain has a literal deep cleaning lymphatic system that relies on fluid dynamics you can consciously trigger using sound and breath.
Right.
We saw how ancient traditions mapped this exact fluid movement up the spine, creating cellular operating manuals that Carl Jung accidentally misinterpreted as psychological metaphors because of his own Cartesian blind spots.
Yeah.
Then we looked at what happens when you turn that engine on, using 2-mo breathing to force the mitochondria to burn fatty acid rocket fuel, creating acoustic standing waves that literally shake the brain.
Unbelievable.
And finally, we saw how that energy culminates in the immortal fetus, that mind-bending epsilon lambda brainwave loop, where absolute stillness meets infinite speed.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Throughout history, philosophy and religion have treated the soul or the spirit as a kind of ghost trapped inside a biological machine. It's the Cartesian divide that tripped up Jung. But based on this synthesis of ancient alchemy and modern physics, what if the spirit isn't a ghost at all? What if the soul is simply the biological machine itself, finely tuned to operate at its absolute highest physiological frequency?
So next time you look at an MRI scan, or hear a Tibetan singing bowl, or read an ancient scroll, remember that the lines between biology and mysticism might not exist at all. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will see you next time.